Back in 1974, my village, which I would rather not mention its name, was going through a brutal civil war. Each day was a nightmare. Bombs and fires were everywhere around the village. The international media did not give us any sort of attention because, of course, it was a small unknown village, so we were completely ignored. The Civil War almost eliminated our country to some extent. The salvation of every need ended, and there was no hope in it except that we must run away from here for good. But for my dad, he was postponing our trip to leave the village. He had hopes that the war would end soon, but in the end he accepted the fact that our village and our home will never get back to normal. So when he was almost okay with the idea of leaving the village, we found that getting out of the borders isn't as easy as we thought, and the only way to reach the borders is by going through an old forest. And maybe that sounds great for some people, as going through a forest isn't much of a deal, but for us it was. Everyone in town knew that forest in particular. We've always been hearing about people who went to that forest and never came back, and almost all of us heard of the screams that come out of it every few days. But now it's our only salvation. By crossing this forest, we'll be crossing the borders of our country. So in order to accomplish that plan, we needed Adam. Adam is one of the only one we know who entered the forest and came back alive. Not just once, but many times as far as we know. We went to see Adam, the guide. He kept looking at us sarcastically, looking at our bags with contempt and in a confident voice. He said, "You are not aware of the danger. You'll be putting yourself in a great danger by crossing this forest." My dad approached him and showed him a bundle of money. Adam looked at the cash and said to my dad that he won't take any money till we reach the other side. Till then, we're just corpses, he said. I believe he said that to let us know that the forest trip is literally deadly, and there's no guarantee regarding our safety. Then, he said in a calm voice, "The forest is a dangerous place. You must listen to my words well. Before you enter, you must know that you'll most probably lose someone, and you may lose everything. Nobody enters the forest and gets out without losing. In seconds, Dad told him we are ready. We then agreed. Our meeting point will be at night in front of the forest. When we all arrived, he was there waiting for us. He looked at us and went silent for a little while, and then he said that this trip will be the last time for him to cross the forest, and that if any one of us want to leave, then it's the last chance for him to go back. We all stood without moving. His eyes went through us again while he was breathing deeply. Then he began to say his instructions in an imperative tone. His rules was all about the same concept, that we must obey his orders and instructions. No matter what happens, we must obey what he says or we will be exposing ourselves to the forest. He was talking about the forest as if it was a creature, not a place. Afterwards, we all started to follow him inside the forest. The main instructions were pretty clear to us. To always look upwards, towards the sky, and never look down. Whatever happens, we must keep looking at the sky and keep walking behind each other's after him. At first, it was kind of a hard way to walk without seeing what's in front of us. We were stepping on each other's legs and keep hitting each other. But after a while, we used to it. But my little sister started to complain that her neck was in pain from looking up. The guide did not speak after hearing her complaints, but I felt he was not happy with letting us bring a little girl in the first place. I decided to hold my little sister and cover her eyes with my jacket till we arrive. We kept walking. The forest was like any forest. After a while, the pine trees appeared in front of our eyes while we kept looking up. But for a minute, I noticed something. There is no sound in the forest except for the sound of our steps. No sound of animals. No sound of insects. No sound of anything at all. After a while, my aunt was the first person to speak. With a tired voice and an interrupted tone, she said if we can rest for a few minutes, as she was tired. The guide ignored her words and kept walking. As if no one spoke, my aunt's husband began to get upset. With an angry voice countering the guide, saying that his wife needs to rest, we have to stop for now. The guide got more annoyed of what he heard and shouted that it's not possible to stop and we must keep moving ahead till we get out of the forest. Suddenly, my aunt stood up and was stunned. She kept saying that she's hearing her sister's voice. I looked at my cousin. From his eyes, I was sure that he could not hear anything. My aunt said with joy again that she's hearing the voice of her sister, and for the next 5 minutes, my aunt and her husband kept talking about the voices they hear, and they concluded that her sister must be in the forest with another group, and that they should join her instead of this group. The guide replied to them saying that this is all a trick from the forest to grab both of you. Do not listen to those voices and keep moving and don't fall for that trick. My dad looked at my aunt's husband and tried to help the guide by telling them that he don't hear anything. But unfortunately, my dad's way of helping them did not work. My aunt and her husband decided to walk towards the voices. They tried to grab their son with them, but he rejected and decided to follow the guide's instructions. Moments went by after them leaving our group. Then we heard their screams. The type of screams that make your body shivers. We continued our journey in fear. We were all walking silently, looking up and walking behind the guide without words. My neck was in much pain at this moment. All that I wanted to do for now is to look down and let my neck relax for a little while. But I ignored this feeling and preferred to continue my journey behind the guide. Suddenly, my grandmother stood up and said in fear that there's something moving behind the trees. The guide's voice was annoyed as he was saying there is nothing there but the forest. My grandmother said the same thing again as if she didn't hear the guide. I looked around the corner of my eyes and really noticed something moving behind the trees. A huge thing that is black in color, moving without sound behind the trees. At first I thought that it was a deer or something like that. But in fact it didn't have horns. And this baffled me even more. I immediately got my focus back up again and continued centering my eyes at the sky. At the same moment I heard the guide talking in low voice, ordering me to never focus on anything but the sky till we reached the end of the forest. Then we suddenly heard my grandmother fall on the ground with screams while shaking and calling us to help. The guide immediately ordered us to not look back and continue. And that's exactly what we did. In no time the guide started speeding up his steps and we all walked behind him in the same tempo without any questions. While looking up, I noticed that the trees began to change shapes. The branches was sort of morphing into a shape like hands. These hands were trying to grab us as long as we were walking. I knew it was not real. My cousin whispered to me in a frightened voice asking if I'm seeing hands moving around us. I didn't reply and kept walking. After a while, we began to see cages made of branches and people were trapped inside those cages. All of the people inside the cages were skeletons of people who had died for a long time, except for one cage that was near us, one of which was a young woman inside, alive. She was asking us to join her and to help her. She said that if the roles were reversed and we were the ones inside the cage, then she would of course help us to get out. My dad suddenly started moving towards her. The guide shouted firmly to not go anywhere and keep walking. My dad did not listen to him and kept walking towards the woman. And from the corner of my eyes I watched the hands holding him. I heard the sound of the woman laughter. It's impossible that the sound of this smile is coming from a human. The guide at that point gave a strict order to keep moving. As he felt I would go after my dad, I started to move while I was trying to hold my guts together. At least to not scare my folded sister who's sleeping on my shoulder. I was moving slowly at that point. The pain was unbearable. Both of my neck pain and my pain of losing my dad. Adam did not lie when he said that we'll lose something in return of crossing the forest. Because of the civil war that lasted for years in my country, I was used to know how stepping on a dead body feels like. And while I was walking behind the guide, I felt that feeling once again. There were dead bodies under my footsteps. Their bones were crushing under our steps as we kept moving while forcing our eyes to only stare at the sky. The guide kept walking with confident steps, not hesitating, not afraid. After a while a light began to appear far from the middle of the trees. The light was getting stronger and dictated the whole place. I heard my cousin's voice thanking God that this is almost over, and suddenly I heard the sound of his scream. He was shouting hysterically. I would have been hysterical. I was about to look back when I suddenly heard the guide warning me to not do that. He told me if I did so, I'll be risking my life, and also my sister's life. I did what he told me. I kept walking and forcing myself to ignore my cousin's screams. After about half an hour later, we arrived at the end of the forest. I was still hearing my cousin's voice screaming in unnatural pain, but now since I made it and crossed the forest, I won't look back. In front of my eyes was a country that is much cleaner than my old hometown. Beautiful roads, and a much nicer place. The guide was so tiring and painful, yet he was the reason I am still alive till now. I paid him the money that my dad left in my bag. After he took the money and started walking away, I shouted at him to wait. He stood up while he was anxious with his eyes full of curiosity. I said to him, I know what happened to each one of them, but I could not understand. What happened to my cousin? He looked at me and said that what happened to my cousin was because he looked down. He saw something that he should not see. That was the last time I saw Adam, our guide. After a few years of that incident, I met some old folks from my village here in New York, and when I asked them about Adam, they said, when he got back after the last time he entered the forest, he started to act very strangely, and then he returned back to the forest by himself. They say he never got back again from the forest since that day. What they said didn't shock me. I know what Adam went through. I have the same feeling as if I was still in the forest and something is attracting me back there again. I've already bought a ticket back to my country. I have to find out a meaning for all of these.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. This is Liam. That was all for today's episode. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more daily horror stories. Till next time.